Starter Pokemon are super beloved and iconic, but even with all the attention they get, there's probably still some stuff you don't know about them or haven't heard before. So in this video, I'm going to be covering a bunch of interesting things about starter Pokemon that are a little more under the radar. Starting with the secret Alola starters. It's actually revealed and implied in the games that there are more starter Pokemon in Alola than just Rowlet, Litten, and Popplio. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, we see Nanu offering Alolan Meowth as a starter to a young trainer. And during this conversation, it's implied that each Alolan island has their own starter Pokemon that they offer to trainers, as opposed to just the normal starters. And that it's the kahunas that distribute the starters, which also lines up with Hala giving you yours at the beginning of Sun and Moon. In Nanu's case, it is a bit different to the normal starter experience because he just offers a choice between 3 Alolan Meowth, but this concept in general is still pretty interesting. And a reason why it's so interesting is because it implies the existence of even more starter Pokemon in Alola that we don't get the chance to learn about. Namely, the starter Pokemon of Akala Island, who would be given out by Olivia, and the starter Pokemon of Pony Island that would be given out by Hapu. It's impossible to say who the starter Pokemon would be for certain, but if we go off of the starter Pokemon that Nanu offers, which is the first stage of his own signature Pokemon, then these other 2 starters would potentially be Rockruff for Akala Island and Mudbray for Pony Island. Just like Alolan Meowth, these are both 2-stage Pokemon as well, which makes this all the more likely in my opinion, but these aren't even the only secret starter Pokemon from these games either, as it is also mentioned that Poipole is a starter Pokemon in its own world, which would also imply that there could potentially be 2 other Pokemon that are offered as choices along with it. If there were, they could potentially be ground and grass types to go along with Poipole's poison type, as that would create what I believe is one of the few perfect type triangles other than grass, fire, and water. And all in all, that makes for Alola having a ton of interesting and secretive stuff going on regarding starter Pokemon. What's not so secret though is how adorable, soft, and squishy this Fulkachi plush is. Fulkachi is the channel mascot and the mascot of the Histrobi Chronicles monster catching video game that I'm working on, and he is available in plush form for you to squish and cuddle and display with your plush collection as much as you want. You can pick one up at HistrobiShop.com, and it even comes with an exclusive Fulkachi promo card that you can't get anywhere else. This card is super well made, it looks great, and as I said, it's free with every plush order, and you can't beat free. Plus, the plush is really well made too, as it is super soft and squishy, and as an added bonus, picking one up helps all of these videos to keep happening. So if you like what I do, consider grabbing a plush with the link in the description, or by simply going to HistrobiShop.com. It's super appreciated, thanks so much to everyone who has grabbed one already, and if you do grab one, get ready for the softest, squishiest little fella that you ever did see, and a super cool trading card too. So yeah, give that a look, and now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. And since we're on the topic of Alola starters, I would like to bring up something really interesting about Rowlet. For full disclosure, the following is just a theory of mine, which I mentioned in a video a while back, but there is a lot of evidence that is consistent with the idea that Rowlet, or at least the concept of Rowlet, could have potentially been planned or considered as a Kalos starter prior to becoming an Alolan one. The reasoning in favor of this is that the Rowlet line have a lot of different traits that fit almost too perfectly in Kalos. For example, with Rowlet and Dartrix in particular, they're pretty fancy Pokemon if you take a close look at them. Rowlet has a bow tie, for instance, and Dartrix in particular is the stereotypical stuck-up fancy rich boy type, which overall fits in pretty well with a European aesthetic. Then, when you get to Decidueye, it really starts to get crazy because you have the fact that Decidueye is possibly partially inspired by Robin Hood, who is also European in origin. And then, probably most significantly of all, Decidueye is an archer, which fits the theme of the Kalos starters all being based around different RPG classes. Again, this is just a theory, but I think it's a pretty interesting one, so I wanted to bring it up here. If you include Mega Evolutions and exclude the pseudo-starter Pokemon like Pikachu and Eevee, starter Pokemon have been 13 of the 18 types at one point or another. The only types that the main set of starter Pokemon have never been before are Normal, Electric, Bug, Ice, and Rock. With that said, that naturally brings up the question of which of these types would you like to most see on a starter Pokemon first? Be sure to drop a comment and let me know, I would really love to hear it. And I personally think I would like to see Ice or Electric, but I'd also be really interested to see how they would pull off Normal and Bug type on a starter Pokemon, so I think that could be pretty cool too. Over the years, we have seen multiple starter Pokemon based on the same sorts of animals, such as Turtwig and Squirtle both being based on turtles, or there even being bird Pokemon of each of the starter types, with Rowlet, Torchic, Piplup, and Quaxly. This has inadvertently created some quote-unquote potential starter Pokemon that in the future could hypothetically fill out the starter type triangle for each of these different groups. So for example, since we already have a grass and a water turtle, we could potentially get a fire turtle somewhere down the line. Other examples of this include a water cat to go with Sprigatito and Litten, a fire frog to go with Bulbasaur and Froakie, a grass crocodile, which I think sounds really cool, to go with Totodile and Fuecoco, and a water monkey to go with Grookey and Chimchar. Pretty much all of these sound like interesting ideas, so again, be sure to let me know in the comments which one of these you would like to see the most in the future. Another interesting theory I have regarding the starter Pokemon has to do with Mudkip and its potential origins. While it is just a theory, I think there is a lot of interesting connections to suggest that Mudkip's design could have originated from the beta days of Generation 2 with Wooper. Both Wooper and Mudkip are based on axolotls, and I've always thought it was interesting that Game Freak made a starter Pokemon based on an animal that they had already made into a Pokemon in the previous generation. That has just always seemed rather curious to me, especially because axolotls are so unique. They even end up with the same type combination once Mudkip evolves as well, so overall I've just found this whole scenario really interesting. This idea became a fully fledged theory though when some of Gold and Silver's beta assets leaked a few years back, and we got a look at Beta Wooper, which looks, in my opinion, as much like a Beta Mudkip as it does a Beta Wooper. There are a lot of similarities between this design and Mudkip, and with all those other interesting connections between these Pokemon that I mentioned earlier, it could be possible, in my opinion, that this Beta Wooper design was somehow involved in the conception and creation of Mudkip, possibly as a point of inspiration, or even as a recycled design that they decided to roll over from Generation 2 into Generation 3, in a similar way that they did with a lot of cut Gen 1 Pokemon that made it into Gen 2. Again, it is just a theory, but I think it's something interesting to think about. There's also cause for speculation with another cut Gen 2 design as well, and this time it relates to Fennekin. It's possible that Fennekin's origins could potentially date back to Generation 2 with this design, simply due to the significant resemblance between the two, along with this Pokemon having a fiery tail which connects it even further to Fennekin type-wise. And speaking of Fennekin, when you think of starter Pokemon, you typically think of them as balanced, because the whole point of them is that they're all more or less equal, and there's no true right or wrong choice when it comes to picking which one you want. However, there is actually a starter Pokemon who is objectively the worst, at least from a base stat perspective. And yup, you guessed it, it's Fennekin. Fennekin has the lowest base stat total of any starter Pokemon to this point, with a total of just 307, making it the weakest starter stat-wise in the games as of this point. However, it does redeem itself a little bit upon evolving into Delphox, as Delphox is tied as the second strongest starter in terms of base stats, with a total of 534. Also, in case you were wondering, Swampert is the strongest starter overall in terms of base stats, with a total of 535. Venusaur is the weakest amongst all the final evolutions, with a total of 525, and the Alola starters are the strongest first stage starters to this point, with a base stat total of 320. There have also been a pretty good handful of starter Pokemon whose designs have either changed over the years after the games were released, or we've since gotten to see what their beta designs were like as well. These would include Venusaur, Charmander, Charizard, Blastoise, in the sense that it was not originally the final evolution of Squirtle, which was instead this Pokemon, Bayleaf, Cyndaquil, Totodile, Feraligatr, Trico, Torchic, Blaziken, Grotle, Torterra, and Prinplup. There are also a plethora of cut gender differences for the starter Pokemon from the beta of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, when that feature was going to be much larger in scope than it is in the final game, and these differences account for just about every starter Pokemon up to Generation 4. An interesting detail about starter Pokemon and their creation was also shared by Junichi Masuda in an interview back in 2009, prior to the release of Pokemon Platinum, where he said that starter Pokemon can take more than a year to develop from initial concept to full-on completion. On the one hand, this is really cool because it shows that they're putting in a lot of effort and thought into these designs, but on the other hand, it makes you wonder how all that time could pass and all that work could be put into these Pokemon, and they could still end up with something like this or this, and have also approved those designs on top of all of that. But that's a discussion for another day. That is all I've got for you guys today though, so be sure to leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed the video, as it really helps the video out. Subscribe if you haven't, which also helps out too and is super appreciated. And if you'd like to further support the channel, you can check out my Patreon for some awesome perks and my Pokemon remixes wherever you happen to get your music. And those help a ton as well and are super duper appreciated. With that said, I will be back soon with another new video. Thank you guys so much for watching this one. I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.